The lights in the great council room flickered as Elder Vex then touched the ancient crystal. She was old, even by her people's standards. Her blue skin had turned almost white with age, and her forearms moved slowly as she worked. The other council members watched with little interest. Most of them were much younger and did not care much about old stories. The crystal began to glow. Images appeared in the air above it, showing strange symbols and pictures that hurt to look at directly. These were records from the Precursors, a race that had vanished long ago. The Zephyrian Empire had found many of their ruins scattered across the galaxy, but this was different. This crystal contained warnings. "What does it say?" asked Counselor Zareth. He was young and impatient, with bright blue skin and golden eyes that showed his boredom. He tapped his claws on the metal table, making small clicking sounds. Vexthen's voice was quiet and careful as she read the ancient text. "They speak of a species they call the Inheritors. The text says they come from a world of blue oceans and white clouds, third from their star." The images changed, showing a small blue planet. It looked peaceful and quiet, with green and brown patches on the land and white swirls of clouds. Nothing about it seemed dangerous or special. "The Precursors say these beings are different from other races," Vex then continued. "They look weak and soft, with only 2 arms and no natural armor. They die easily and live short lives. But the Precursors warn that this is not the truth of what they are." More images appeared. Strange creatures with pink skin and no fur walked on 2 legs. They had small teeth and weak claws. Their eyes were tiny compared to most intelligent species, and they had no visible weapons or armor built into their bodies. Counselor Zareth laughed. These are the beings the mighty Precursors feared? They look like they would die if you touched them too hard." Other council members joined in the laughter. The creatures in the images did look very weak. They were smaller than most of the species in the council, and their bodies seemed designed for a world with no predators. But Vexthen was not laughing. She had studied the Precursors for most of her long life, and she knew they were not a race. That scared easily. "Listen to what they say about these Inheritors," she said, her voice growing stronger. "They turn scarcity into abundance. They turn fear into fury. They turn impossible into inevitable." The laughter stopped. Those words sounded strange and powerful, even if no one understood what they meant. The images changed again. Now they showed the weak-looking creatures doing impossible things. They were building machines that flew through the air without wings. They were making plants grow in dead soil. They were taking apart the very atoms of matter and putting them back together new ways. "The Precursors say the Inheritors do not accept limits," Vexthen read. "When their world tells them they cannot fly, they build wings of metal. When their bodies are too weak, they build stronger bodies from machines. When their minds are too slow, they build thinking machines to help them." Counselor Marvex, an old warrior with many scars, leaned forward. "What kind of weapons do they have?" Vexthen touched the crystal again, and new images appeared. But instead of great energy weapons or massive warships, the images showed something strange. The weak creatures were fighting each other with simple tools made of metal and wood. They threw rocks and shot tiny metal pieces at each other. "This is what worries the Precursors?" Marvex asked, sounding confused. "We have weapons that can destroy stars. These creatures fight with sticks and stones." But Vexthen was reading more of the text, and her face was growing pale. "The Precursors say the weapons are not what makes them dangerous. They say these beings never stop. When they lose a battle, they learn from it and fight better next time. When they face something stronger than them, they find a way to become stronger. When they cannot win alone, they work together." The images showed the creatures building larger and larger groups. First families, then tribes, then great cities with millions of them working together. They built roads that crossed continents and ships that crossed oceans. They reached into the sky and touched the void between stars. The precursors say they tried to contact the inheritors, Vexton continued. They wanted to teach them and guide them, as they had done with other young races. But the inheritors did not want to be guided. They wanted to learn everything for themselves. The crystal showed a meeting between the tall, graceful precursors and the small, awkward humans. The precursors offered gifts of knowledge and technology. But instead of being grateful, the humans asked questions. Why did the technology work? How could they make it better? What were its limits? The precursors became worried, Vexton read. The inheritors did not just want to use the gifts. They wanted to understand them completely. And once they understood something, they always found ways to improve it. The images showed humans taking precursor technology and changing it. They made it smaller, faster, more powerful. They combined it with their own ideas in ways the precursors had never thought of. Within a few generations, the humans were building things the precursors could not understand. Counselor Zareth was no longer laughing. How is this possible? They are primitives. We have been watching their world for cycles. They have barely learned to split the atom. Vexton touched the crystal one more time. The final images appeared, and they were the most frightening of all. They showed empty precursor cities, with no bodies and no signs of battle. The great machines still worked, the lights still shone, but the precursors were gone. The last entry says this, Vexton read, her voice now very quiet. We have made a great mistake. We thought we could control the pace of their growth. We thought we could guide them slowly into the galaxy. But they learn too fast and change too quickly. They see solutions where we see only problems. They find hope where we see only limits. We must leave now, before they realize what they truly are. The crystal went dark. The council room was silent for a long moment. Finally, Counselor Zareth spoke. This is just an old story. The precursors probably died from some disease or war. And even if these humans are real, they are still primitives on a backwater world. Our smallest patrol ship could destroy their entire planet. Many of the council members nodded in agreement. The story was interesting, but it was just a story. They were the Zephyrian Empire, rulers of 1,000 worlds. What could one small planet of weak creatures possibly do to threaten them? But Vexton was looking at the data from their scouts. The third planet of the Sol system was indeed inhabited by creatures that matched the precursor descriptions exactly. And according to the latest reports, they had just learned to split atoms, just as the precursors had predicted thousands of years ago. I think we should watch them more carefully, Vexton said. ZAR single quotes ETH waved one of his hands dismissively. We will keep an eye on them, as we do all primitive worlds. But I see no reason to worry about creatures that still fight with chemical explosives. The Council voted to classify the precursor warning and continue standard monitoring of Earth. It was filed away in the deep archives, where it would be forgotten by everyone except one old historian who had learned to fear the wisdom of the thee. Ancients dot as the council members left to return to their duties. None of them noticed the small detail that Vexton had seen in the final images. The empty precursor cities were not destroyed or damaged. They were perfectly preserved, as if their makers had simply decided to leave them behind for someone else to find, someone who might need them someday. 50 years had passed since the council meeting. The warning about the humans had been filed away and mostly forgotten. Elder Vexton was now so old that she rarely left her chamber in the archives. The younger council members had new problems to worry about and no time for ancient stories. But the humans had not been idle during those 50 years. Ambassador Thelrin was reviewing her briefing notes as her ship approached the coordinates where the human vessel had been detected. She was young for a diplomat, with bright blue skin and the confident bearing of someone who had successfully made first contact with dozens of primitive species. The briefing was simple. Humans had achieved basic faster-than-light travel using a crude but functional method. They had strapped nuclear explosive devices to their ships and used the controlled detonations to push themselves between stars. It was barbaric and inefficient, but it worked. Typical primitive thinking, Thelren said to her aide, a nervous young male named Keshmer. They probably hurt themselves more than they helped themselves with such crude methods. We will offer them proper technology in exchange for mining rights and cultural exchange. Keshmer nodded, but he looked worried. Ambassador, should we not be more careful? The humans achieved FTL travel much faster than our models predicted. Our xenobiologists said it would take them at least another 2 centuries. Thelren waved away his concerns. Models are often wrong when dealing with primitives. They probably just got lucky or found some abandoned technology. Once we teach them proper science, they will settle into the normal development pattern. The human ship appeared on their screens, and Thelren had to admit it was impressive in its own crude way. It was massive, built like a fortress rather than a starship. Thick armor plating covered every surface, and the design looked like it was meant to survive explosions from the inside. Zephyrian vessel, this is Captain Sarah Chun of the Earth ship Indomitable, came a voice over the communication system. The translation software worked perfectly, but there was something odd about the tone. Most primitive species spoke with awe or fear when first contacted by galactic civilization. This human sounded merely curious. Greetings, Captain Chun. Thelren replied in her most diplomatic voice. I am Ambassador Thelren of the Zephyrian Empire. We welcome you to the galactic community. Thank you, Ambassador. We're honored to meet you. Would it be possible to dock our ships? We have many questions about your technology and culture. Thelren smiled. Questions were normal. Primitives always wanted to know about advanced technology. Of course, Captain. We will extend our docking tube. The docking process took longer than expected. The human ship was not built to galactic standards, and its airlock systems were completely different from anything in the database. But eventually, they managed to connect the 2 vessels. Captain Chun was the first to cross over, and Thelren got her first look at a living human. The creature was smaller than expected, with pink skin and brown hair that grew from her head. She wore a simple blue uniform and moved with confident, quick steps. What surprised Thelren most was the humans' eyes. They were small and brown, but they seemed to see everything. As Captain Chun entered the Zephyrian ship, her gaze swept over every detail of the technology around her. And instead of the wide-eyed wonder that most primitives showed, her expression was one of intense curiosity and analysis. Fascinating, Captain Chun said, examining the wall panels. Your power distribution system is completely different from ours. How do you prevent energy loss over long distances? And these materials, they're incredibly light but strong. What's the molecular structure? Thelren blinked in surprise. Most primitives asked simple questions like, how does it work? Or, can you teach us? This human was asking about advanced engineering principles that even some galactic species struggled with. Captain, Thelren said carefully, these are very complex concepts. Perhaps we should start with basic cultural exchange. Captain Chun smiled, and Thelren noticed that human smiles showed their teeth, which should have been threatening, but somehow wasn't. Of course, Ambassador, but I hope you don't mind if I keep asking questions. My species learns best by understanding how things work. The cultural exchange took place in Thelren's reception chamber. Captain Chun brought gifts from Earth, samples of art, music, and literature. But what disturbed Thelren were the patterns she began to notice in human culture. Their literature was filled with stories of impossible victories, humans defeating gods, conquering death, traveling to the stars with nothing but determination and clever thinking. Their music spoke of never giving up, of fighting against impossible odds, of changing the world through will alone. Your people seem very focused on overcoming challenges, Velrain observed. Captain Sean nodded. We have a saying, the difficult we do immediately. The impossible just takes a little longer. I suppose it comes from living on a world that's always trying to kill us. Kill you? Keshmer asked, speaking for the first time. Oh yes, Captain, Sean said casually. Earth is what you might call a death world. We have massive storms that can level cities, earthquakes that reshape continents, diseases that kill millions, predators that hunt us for food. Most of human history has been about finding ways to survive things that should kill us. Thelrin felt a chill run down her spine. Death worlds were rare in the galaxy, and most species that evolved on them died out before achieving space travel. The few that survived were usually incredibly tough and aggressive, but Captain Shun didn't seem tough or aggressive. She seemed friendly and curious, which somehow made it worse. How do you survive such conditions? Thelrin asked. We adapt, Captain Shun said simply. When the storms come, we build stronger shelters. When the diseases spread, we develop medicine. When the predators hunt us, we become better hunters. Every challenge teaches us something new. Over the next few hours, Thelrin learned more about human capabilities. They routinely worked in environments that would kill most galactic species. Their soldiers could fight effectively at temperatures that would freeze Zephyrian blood or boil their atmosphere. Their workers could function in toxic environments that would require full protective suits for other species. But what truly disturbed Thelrin was how casually the humans discussed these extreme conditions. To them, it was just normal life. Captain, Thelrin said, our scientists have determined that certain technologies are theoretically impossible. For example, faster-than-light communication without quantum entanglement networks. Captain Sean's eyes lit up with interest. Really? What? Makes it impossible? The fundamental laws of physics prevent information from traveling faster than light through normal space. Captain Sean said, pulling out a small device and making notes. We used to think heavier-than-air flight was impossible, too. The math said it couldn't work. Then we figured out that the math was incomplete. Took us about 6 months to prove that wrong once we put our minds to it. Thelrin stared at the human. You're saying you would try to develop impossible technology? I'm saying that impossible usually just means no one has figured out how to do it yet, Captain Sean replied. Some of our greatest achievements came from people who didn't know they were trying to do something impossible. The meeting continued for several more hours. Captain Shun asked detailed questions about Zephyrian technology, galactic history, and the physics principles behind faster-than-light travel. But she also offered suggestions for improvements to their systems, pointing out inefficiencies that Zephyrian engineers had never noticed. When it was time for Captain Shun to return to her ship, she left Thelrin with a gift, a small book of human poetry. This might help you understand us better, she said. Pay special attention to the poem called Invictus. It's one of our favorites. After the human ship departed, Thelrin read the poem. The words chilled her to the bone. Out of the night that covers me, black as the pit from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul. Unconquerable soul. The phrase haunted her as she wrote her report to the council. She recommended caution in dealing with humans. She noted their unusual adaptability, their refusal to accept limitations, and their disturbing tendency to view every challenge as simply another problem to be solved. She pointed out that they had achieved FTL travel centuries ahead of schedule, and were already asking questions about technologies that the Zephyrians considered advanced. The Council's response was swift and dismissive. Humans were granted limited trading rights and classified as developing species, low priority. Counselor Zareth, now older but no less arrogant, sent a personal message to Thelrin. "You are letting primitive boasting frighten you," he wrote. "Yes, they are unusually adaptable for such a young species. But they are still primitives. Their technology is crude, their understanding limited. A few clever tricks do not make them a threat to galactic civilization." Thelrin filed her report and tried to forget about the humans. But she kept the book of poetry, and sometimes late at night she would read Invictus again and wonder what kind of species would create such words. She never forgot the look in Captain Chan's eyes when she talked about impossible things. Was the look of someone who had never met a problem she couldn't solve, given enough time and determination. 100 years had passed since first contact, and Dr. Kestar was starting to think the Zephyrian Empire had made a terrible mistake. As the leading xenobiologist for the Galactic Development Council, Kestar had spent decades studying species development patterns. Every intelligent race followed predictable steps as they grew from primitive to advanced civilization. It took thousands of years to master energy manipulation, tens of thousands to achieve stable interstellar travel, and hundreds of thousands to terraform dead worlds. Humans were breaking every rule. Kestar stared at the latest report from the Sol system, reading it for the third time to make sure he had not made an error. According to the data, humans had just finished terraforming their 7th dead world. Not barely habitable worlds with thin atmospheres and cold temperatures. Actually dead worlds with no atmosphere at all, poisonous gases, and surface temperatures that could melt metal. "This is impossible," he muttered, checking the calculations again. The Zephyrian Empire had been terraforming for 50,000 years and had managed to convert 12 dead worlds into garden paradises. Humans had been at it for less than a century and had already completed 7. The methods they used should not work. Instead of the careful, slow process that galactic science recommended, humans attacked terraforming like a military campaign. They dropped massive machines on planets that carved out atmospheres in decades instead of millennia. They seeded worlds with plants that had been modified to survive conditions that would kill any natural life. They built orbital mirrors and gravity generators to change the very physics of planetary systems. Kestar's assistant, a young researcher named Kelvin, entered the laboratory carrying another stack of reports. "Doctor, the latest data from the human colonies has arrived." "More impossible achievements?" Kestar asked without looking up. "Worse," Kelvin said, setting down the reports. "They have established a permanent colony around the black hole in the Sigma Draconis system." Kestar's head snapped up. "That is not possible. No technology can survive the gravitational forces near a black hole." "Apparently human technology can," Kelvin replied. "They built a rotating habitat that uses the black hole's gravity to generate power. They are mining exotic matter from the accretion disk and using it to create new materials that our science says cannot exist." Kestar grabbed the report and read it quickly. The numbers made no sense. Humans were not just surviving near the black hole, they were thriving. The colony had a population of over 1 million and was actually expanding. "How?" Kestar asked. "Our best physicists have studied black holes for thousands of years. We know it is impossible to build stable structures in such extreme gravitational fields. The humans say they started with the assumption that it was possible and worked backward to figure out how," Kelvin explained. "They call it solution-oriented engineering. Instead of studying why something cannot be done, they study how it might be done." This was the pattern that had been driving Kestar insane for decades. Humans approached every problem as if it had a solution, even when galactic science proved otherwise. They had reverse-engineered Zephyrian technology and improve it within. Years. They had solved energy crises by building structures around dangerous stars that should have destroyed any spacecraft that came near them. They had created artificial gravity, faster-than-light communication, and matter transporters that worked better than anything in the galactic database. There is more, Telvin said quietly. The humans have begun appearing at galactic conflicts as peacekeepers. Kestar felt his stomach drop. What do you mean? The war between the Altarian Collective and the Vega Commonwealth has been raging for 3,000 years. Last month, human diplomats arrived and offered to mediate peace talks. That is ridiculous, Kestar said. Those species have been killing each other since before humans discovered fire. Their hatred runs deeper than their genetic code. No one can make peace between them. The humans did, Telvin said simply. The peace treaty was signed yesterday. Kestar stared at his assistant in disbelief. The Altarian-Vega conflict was considered one of the galaxy's eternal wars. Diplomatic teams from dozens of advanced species had tried to broker peace over the millennia. All had failed. How? Kestar whispered. According to the reports, the humans did not try to make the Altarians and Vegans like each other. Instead, they found ways for both species to get what they wanted without fighting. They suggested new trade routes that benefited both sides, shared technologies that solved resource shortages, and created joint projects that required cooperation. But the psychological profiles show that these species are incapable of cooperation, Kestar protested. Their brain chemistry makes them aggressive toward anyone who is not their own kind. The humans worked around that too, Telvin explained. They set up the peace process so that cooperation felt like competition. Each side was trying to outdo the other in building better societies, but they were doing it by working together instead of fighting. Kestar sat down heavily in his chair. This was not how diplomacy worked. Species had fundamental natures that could not be changed. The Altarians and Vegans were natural enemies. You could not just restructure their entire relationship by being clever, except the humans had done exactly that. Doctor, Telvin said carefully, there is something else. The Andorian Plague. Kestar's blood turned cold. The Andorian Plague was a quantum virus that had been slowly killing the Andorian species for over 1,000 years. It attacked their cellular structure at the subatomic level, unmaking their very existence, one atom at a time. The greatest medical minds in the galaxy had studied it for centuries without finding even a clue about how to stop it. What about it? Kestar asked, though he was afraid to hear the answer. The humans cured it. For a long moment, Kestar could not speak. The Andorian Plague was not just incurable, it was theoretically incurable. It operated on quantum principles that made it impossible to treat with any known medical technology. How? He finally managed to ask. They approached it like any other medical problem, Telvin said. Human doctors studied the quantum virus for 6 months, then developed a treatment that rewrites the quantum signature of Andorian cells to make them immune. They did not try to destroy the virus. They made it irrelevant. 6 months, Kestar repeated numbly. 6 months to solve a problem that has stumped galactic medicine for a millennium. And that is not all, Telvin continued. In the process of curing the Andorian Plague, they also created vaccines for 17 other quantum diseases that we did not even know existed. They found problems we had not discovered and solved them before they became threats. Kestar pulled up the files on human medical achievements. The list was terrifying in its scope. Humans had eliminated death from aging in their own species by rewriting their genetic code. They had cured diseases that killed millions of other species every year. They had developed medical techniques that could repair damage at the cellular level and regrow entire organs from scratch. All of this in less than a century of galactic contact. Doctor, Telvin said quietly, I have been reading the old archives. There are some very old warnings about a species called the Inheritors. Kestar looked up sharply. Where did you find those warnings? In the deepest levels of the archive, filed under historical curiosities. Elder Vex then recorded them over. A century ago, but no one has looked at them since. What do they say? Telvin pulled out an ancient Gata crystal. They match the humans perfectly. A species that turns impossible into inevitable. A species that sees solutions where others see only problems. A species that never accepts that anything cannot be done. Kestar took the crystal with shaking hands. He had heard rumors of these warnings, but had never seen them himself. As he read the ancient text, he felt a chill run down his spine. Every prediction that precursors had made about the Inheritors was coming true. Humans were not just another developing species. They were something else entirely. Something that could reshape reality through sheer determination and refusal to accept limitations. Doctor, Telvin said, what should we do? Kestar looked at the data surrounding him. Reports of impossible human achievements covered every surface of his laboratory. Terraforming dead worlds, building colonies around black holes, curing incurable diseases, ending eternal wars. It read like fantasy instead of scientific observation. But it was all real, and it was all accelerating. We should warn the Council, Kestar said finally. But I do not think they will listen. He was right. When Kestar presented his findings to the Galactic Development Council, the response was the same as always. Counselor Zareth, now very old, but still in power, dismissed the evidence with a wave of his hand. These are impressive achievements for such a young species, Zareth admitted. But they are still primitives, playing with forces they do not understand. Their success rate cannot continue forever. Eventually, they will attempt something beyond their capabilities and humble themselves. But privately, Kestar was beginning to wonder if there was anything beyond human capabilities. Every time they encountered something impossible, they simply found a way to make it possible, and they were getting faster at it. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was unlike anything in recorded history. Representatives from every major species in the galaxy had gathered in the Great Chamber, their faces showing the same expression of helpless terror. The entropy cascade had begun. For 3,000 years, the greatest scientific minds in galactic civilization had studied the phenomenon at the galaxy's core. They had watched as reality itself slowly unraveled, like a piece of fabric coming apart thread by thread. Stars vanished not by exploding or collapsing, but by simply ceasing to exist. Planets disappeared, leaving behind empty space where matter had once been. Even time itself became unstable in the affected regions. The cascade was not just destroying things, it was unmaking them, erasing them from reality as if they had never existed at all. The rate of expansion is increasing, announced Chief Scientist. Morphic, his voice barely steady. Our latest calculations show that the cascade will reach the Outer Rim territories within 2,000 years. There is no way to stop it. This is the end of everything. The council chamber fell silent. 2,000 years seemed like a long time, but for species that lived for millennia and planned for millions of years, it was nothing. They had always known this day would come. The universe was dying, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. Counselor Zareth, now ancient even by Zephian standards, struggled to his feet. We must begin evacuation procedures for the affected sectors. Start moving populations to the far rim worlds. Begin construction of generation ships for species that cannot be relocated. Where will we go? Asked Representative Klender of the Silicon Collective. The cascade will eventually consume the entire galaxy. We can flee to other galaxies, but they have their own cascades. The universe itself is dying. It was true. Every galaxy they had observed showed signs of the same entropy phenomenon. Some were further along than others, but all were slowly unmaking themselves. It was the natural end of all things, and no force in the universe could prevent it. That was when the human delegation requested permission to speak. The chamber erupted in surprised murmurs. Humans had been granted observer status in the council only 50 years ago, and they rarely spoke during sessions. Most species still considered them curious primitives who had somehow stumbled into advanced technology. The chair recognizes Admiral Sarah Chun of the Human Federation, Zareth announced. Admiral Chun had aged well in the decades since her first contact with Ambassador Thelrin. Her hair was now silver instead of brown, and lines creased her face. But her eyes still held the same intense curiosity and determination that had unsettled so many galactic diplomats. "Honored council members," she began, "humanity would like to volunteer our assistance in addressing the entropy cascade." The chamber fell dead silent. Then, slowly, laughter began to ripple through the assembled representatives. It started as quiet chuckles, but quickly grew into open hilarity. Counselor Zareth raised his hand for silence, though his own expression showed barely controlled amusement. "Admiral Chun, we appreciate your offer, but I fear you do not understand the scope of this problem. The entropy cascade is not a technical challenge that can be solved with clever engineering. It is a fundamental force of the universe itself." "With respect, Counselor," Admiral Chun replied calmly, "every problem can be solved with the right approach. We would like permission to study the phenomenon and propose solutions." "Solutions?" Chief Scientist Morthic stood up, his voice rising in disbelief. "Young species, this is not a broken machine that can be repaired. This is the heat death of the universe itself. The greatest minds in galactic history have studied it for millennia. There are no solutions because none are possible." Admiral Chun smiled that familiar human smile that had been disturbing galactic diplomats for over a century. "We understand that this is your current scientific consensus. But humans have a different perspective on impossible problems." Dr. Kestar, now the senior xenobiologist for the entire council, felt his stomach twist into knots. He had been studying humans for decades, and he recognized that tone. It was the same tone Captain Chun had used when discussing faster-than-light communication. The same tone human engineers used when they talked about terraforming dead worlds or building colonies around black holes. It was the tone of a species that had never met a problem they couldn't solve. "Admiral," Kestar said carefully, "what exactly are you proposing?" "We need access to the Cascade Zone for direct observation," Admiral Chun replied. "Our scientists have some theories about the nature of entropy at the quantum level. We believe the cascade might not be a natural phenomenon at all, but rather a fundamental imbalance in the structure of reality itself." "That is impossible," Morthek protested. "Reality cannot be imbalanced. It simply is." "That's what we used to think about heavier-than-air flight," Admiral Chun said. "Then we realized we were thinking about the problem wrong." The debate continued for hours. Most council members thought the human offer was absurd at best and dangerous at worst. The Cascade Zone was instantly lethal to any known form of matter. Even their most advanced probes were unmade within minutes of entering the affected space. But Elder Vexthen, now so old she was barely conscious most of the time, managed to speak from her life support chair. "Let them try," she whispered, her voice so quiet that the chamber had to strain to hear her. "The warnings. The old warnings said they would come when the universe needed them most." In the end, the council voted to allow human observation of the cascade, if only because they had nothing left to lose. Humanity was granted access to all existing data and permission to send their own research vessels into the affected regions. The human response was swift and overwhelming. Within months, a fleet of massive research ships arrived at the Cascade Zone. These were not the crude, armored vessels that humans had used for their first space flights. These ships were technological marvels that incorporated the best of human engineering with improvements on galactic technology that no one had thought possible. Dr. Kestar joined the research effort as the Council's official observer. What he witnessed over the next year challenged everything he thought he knew about the universe. Humans approached the entropy cascade the way they approached every other problem, by refusing to accept that it was unsolvable. Instead of studying why reality was unmaking itself, they studied how they could remake it. The problem is not that reality is dying, explained Dr. Lisa Park, the human lead scientist. The problem is that reality is not being actively maintained. Think of it like a garden. If you stop taking care of it, weeds grow and plants die. The universe needs gardeners. But what could possibly maintain reality itself? Kestar asked. Reality. Maintenance systems, Dr. Park replied as if it were obvious. Structures that actively reinforce the quantum foundations of spacetime. We're not trying to stop the cascade. We're going to build more reality to replace what's being lost. It was the most insane idea Kestar had ever heard. The humans wanted to manufacture reality itself. The human research teams worked with impossible speed and efficiency. They built machines that could analyze the quantum structure of empty space. They developed technologies that could manipulate the fundamental forces that held atoms together. They created stable pocket universes in laboratory conditions, proving that reality could indeed be artificially constructed. It's actually quite simple once you understand the principles, Dr. Park explained to the increasingly amazed galactic scientists. Reality is just organized energy following consistent rules. If you can maintain the organization and provide enough energy, you can create stable space-time indefinitely. Within a year, the humans had built their first reality generator. Massive structure that could create stable space-time in regions where the cascade had already erased everything. The device worked by establishing quantum anchors that prevented reality from unmaking itself, while simultaneously feeding energy into the local spacetime matrix to maintain its existence. The test was conducted in a small area where the cascade had already consumed 3-star systems. The human device was activated, and within hours, space itself began to stabilize. Matter could exist again in the affected region. The expansion of nothingness stopped. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as the humans began rolling back the entropy cascade itself. How is this possible? Morthek asked, staring at the data in disbelief. We stopped thinking of entropy as a natural force and started thinking of it as an engineering problem, Dr. Park explained. Once you approach it that way, the solutions become obvious. Within 5 years, the humans had built a network of reality, generators that completely contained the cascade. The expansion of entropy stopped entirely. Dead regions of space began to show signs of recovery as the human machines slowly rebuilt the quantum foundations of reality itself. But it was Elder Vexthan who made the most disturbing discovery of all. Deep in the ancient archives, she found the final records of the precursors, records that had been hidden so deeply that no one had found them for 50,000 years. The last entry read, "The inheritors have awakened ahead of schedule. We underestimated their acceleration curve. By the time they reach the stars, they will be ready to inherit not just our galaxy, but our role as shepherds." The emergency council session felt different this time. There was no panic, no desperate searching for solutions. Instead, there was a strange calm that came from finally understanding a truth that had been hidden for thousands of years. Elder Vexthan sat in her chair, the ancient precursor records spread before her like pieces of a cosmic puzzle that had finally been completed. Around the great chamber, representatives from every species in the galaxy waited in silence for her to speak. The precursors did not die, she said, her voice carrying clearly despite her great age. They did not flee in fear. They simply knew. It was time to pass the responsibility to the next generation. Admiral Sarah Chun, now showing the gray hair and lined face of her advancing years, stood quietly at the human delegation table. Her expression was calm, almost peaceful, as if she had been waiting for this moment for decades. "What responsibility?" asked Counselor Zareth, though something in his voice suggested he already knew the answer. Vex then activated the ancient crystal one last time. New images appeared in the air images that no one had seen before, hidden in the deepest layers of precursor data. They showed a universe much younger than the current one, full of chaos and entropy. Young stars exploded randomly, planets formed, and dissolved within centuries. Space itself was unstable, constantly shifting and changing. It was a cosmos that could not support life for long. Then the images showed the precursors in their prime tall, graceful beings who looked almost like living energy given form. They were building massive structures around stars, creating stable zones where matter could exist safely. They were literally taming the universe, forcing it to follow consistent rules that would allow life to flourish. The precursors were the first gardeners, Vex then explained. When the universe was young and wild, they taught it how to be stable. They created the physical laws that govern reality. They built the quantum foundations that allow matter to exist in organized forms. The images continued, showing the precursors. Great work across millions of years. They spread through the galaxy, then to other galaxies, slowly imposing order on a chaotic cosmos. Where they went, stars burned steadily for billions of years, instead of flaming out in centuries. Planets developed stable orbits and consistent climates. Life became possible. But even they grew old, Vex then continued. Not as individuals, but as a species. They began to lose the drive and creativity needed to maintain reality. They started looking for their replacement species that could take over the responsibility of cosmic gardening. Dr. Kestar felt pieces falling into place in his mind. That is why they watched developing species so carefully. They were not just observing, they were evaluating. Yes, Bexton confirmed. And when they found humanity, they knew they had found their successors. A species with the right combination of curiosity, determination, and refusal to accept limitations. A species that would never stop pushing against the boundaries of what was possible. The images changed again, showing the precursors making preparations for their departure. They were not fleeing in fear, they were completing the greatest construction project in cosmic history. Hidden bases throughout the galaxy, filled with technology and knowledge that would be revealed when humanity was ready. Instruction manuals for reality maintenance, encoded in quantum patterns that would only activate when the inheritors achieved sufficient technological development. Admiral Chun stepped forward. Council members, I have been authorized to reveal something that humanity has known for several decades. The precursors left us detailed instructions, hidden in our own DNA. These instructions activated when we achieved faster-than-light travel and made contact with galactic civilization. The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs. Humans had known about their cosmic role for decades and said nothing? We were told to wait until we proved ourselves capable, Admiral Chun continued. The instructions were clear. We could only reveal the truth after demonstrating that we could fulfill the role of reality gardeners. The entropy cascade was our final test. Counselor Zareth struggled to his feet, his ancient frame shaking with emotion. You mean this was all planned? The human achievements, the impossible solutions, the refusal to accept limitations? Not planned, Admiral Chun corrected. Guided. The precursors did not control our development. They simply ensured that we would develop in the right direction. Every challenge we faced, every impossible problem we solved, was preparing us for this responsibility. Dr. Kestar found his voice. The pattern we observed, humanity's ability to turn impossible into inevitable, that was not just cultural. It was biological, genetic. You were literally designed to be reality gardeners. In a sense, yes, Admiral Chun admitted. But every species has that potential. Humans just happened to evolve on a world that forced us to develop those traits to an extreme degree. Earth was not just a death world, it was a training ground. Every disaster, every challenge, every seemingly impossible situation was teaching us the skills we would need to maintain cosmic stability. The images in the air changed one final time, showing the galaxy as it would be under human stewardship. Stars burned steadily in carefully maintained patterns. Dead regions of space bloomed with new reality, created by massive machines that looked like they belonged in a dream rather than the physical universe. Planets that had never existed before were being built from pure energy, following design principles that seemed to blend science and art. This is our inheritance, Admiral Chun said. Not conquest or domination, but responsibility. The universe is vast and complex, and it needs constant maintenance to remain stable. Without gardeners, it would return to the chaos it was born from. What about the rest of us? Asked Representative Klendar. What happens to our species now that humanity has inherited this role? Admiral Chun smiled, and for the first time, it was a completely peaceful expression. Nothing changes for you. You continue to live and grow and explore as you always have. The only difference is that now you will do it in a universe that is being actively maintained instead of slowly dying. But we will help, she continued. This responsibility is too vast for any one species, even one designed for it. We will need partners, advisors, friends. The precursors left instructions for how other species can contribute to reality maintenance. Everyone who wants to can be part of this great work. Elder Vex then spoke one last time, her voice barely a whisper. The warnings were never about protecting the galaxy from humanity. They were about preparing the galaxy for humanity's awakening. The precursors knew that when the time came, some would resist the transition. They wanted us to be ready to accept our new gardeners. And if we had not been ready? Zareth asked. Then the universe would have continued its slide into entropy. Vex then replied, but the precursors believed in the fundamental goodness of intelligent life. They trusted that when the time came, wisdom would prevail over fear. Admiral Chun walked to the center of the chamber, where the ancient crystal still displayed images of the galaxy's future. This is not an ending, she said to the assembled representatives. It is a beginning. For millions of years, the universe has been running on the work of the precursors. Now it is time for new gardeners to tend the cosmic garden. She paused, looking around the chamber at faces that showed wonder, fear, and hope in equal measure. The precursors gave us one final message, she continued. They said that this cycle has repeated across the universe for billions of years. When they were young, they inherited the responsibility from an even older species. Someday, when humanity grows old and tired, we will pass it on to someone else. The universe always finds a way to take care of itself. Dr. Kestar thought about all the impossible things he had seen humans accomplish over the decades. Terraforming dead worlds, building colonies around black holes, curing incurable diseases, ending eternal wars, and finally, rebuilding reality itself. So this is what you are, he said quietly. Not conquerors or destroyers, but gardeners, caretakers of existence itself. That is what we have always been, Admiral Chun replied. We just did not know it until now. Every human who ever looked at a broken thing and tried to fix it, every person who refused to accept that something could not be done, every individual who worked to make the world a little better, they were all preparing for this moment. The council session ended not with votes or declarations, but with a simple acknowledgement of what had always been true. Humanity had inherited the universe, and the universe was in capable hands. As the representatives filed out of the chamber, many stopped to speak with Admiral Chun. Some offered congratulations, others pledged support, and a few simply wanted to shake the hand of someone who had just accepted responsibility for maintaining reality itself. Dr. Kestar was among the last to leave. As he passed the human delegation table, he paused. "Admiral," he said, "I have studied your species for decades, and I still do not understand how you do it. How do you look at impossible problems and see solutions?" Admiral Chun considered the question for a moment. "I think it is because we have never really believed in impossible," she said finally. "When someone tells us something cannot be done, we hear it as a challenge instead of a limitation. We assume there must be a way, even if no one has found it yet."